genuinely believe that Kamaru Usman, from my own individual perspective, overall, if you factor in his title defenses and the percentages of his knockouts or his knockout ratios in general, I would argue that Kamaru Usman overall is a greater welterweight champ than George St. Pierre. So if we're going to rank Kamaru Usman in with regard to his level of accomplishments, and then we're going to compare that to George St. Pierre with regard to his level of accomplishments, overall, I would argue that Kamaru Usman is a greater champion than George St. Pierre. And this is down to a multitude of components, right? And one of them being, obviously, Kamaru Usman's knockout ratio and his dominance in the octagon. What we know about George St. Pierre is that he's obviously been historically dominant, dominating the likes of Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit, and the likes of Matt Serra, Matt Hughes, and the list just goes on. But with regard to a lot of these fights, I think one of the problems that we had with GSP was that his inability to be able to finish his opponents. So a lot of his fights were decision victories. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these fights were dominant decision victories. However, Kamaru Usman, on the other hand, or conversely, he's been knocking people out throughout his title defenses. I mean, the guy has had 5 consecutive title defenses in the welterweight division, fought twice against Colby Covington, one of his toughest fights, fought twice against Jorge Masvidal, and once against Gilbert Burns. Each and every one of these opponents that Kamaru Usman had faced had the capability to shut his lights out, knocked out Masvidal, knocked out Colby Covington, and knocked out Gilbert Burns. So based on these factors, I agree that GSP is one of the most dominant welterweight champions in UFC history and definitely deserves a UFC Hall of Fame, which he's already got. But overall, based on accomplishments, based on dominance, based on finish ratios in the UFC octagon, I would argue that Kamaru Usman is a greater champion than George St. Pierre.